All right. Thank you everyone for joining today's workshop about, I'm already going too fast, emotional eating, with kind of the topic around it, how to go from mindless to mindful eating. So if you joined today's workshop or you're watching it back later, and then probably you experience things like maybe emotional eating, overeating or binge eating, or maybe even under eating. It can show up in different kind of ways, eating, your relationship with food. So what this workshop is going to do, it's going to help you to, first of all, like identify and become more aware about like what mindless and mindful eating now actually is. And going to give you some super practical steps how you can actually start to become a more intuitive and mindful eater. So I split it up in a few different categories. It's probably going to take around 45 minutes with the opportunity to ask some questions in the end. And if you're joining me today or you're watching this back later, I also got a little surprise for you in the end. So make sure to stick with me all the way through. Also, if there are certain things unclear, not sure what it actually means, or you just have some questions in between, always feel free to drop them in the chat or reach out to me if you are watching it on replay, and I'm happy to answer them. So with that being said, thank you for being here, and let's dive right into it. So first part, mindless eating, that's where we start to basically create some more awareness around maybe different patterns that you experience yourself, different mechanisms. So what actually is mindless and mindful eating? And then we slowly move up the chart towards mindful eating and how you can actually do that. So what you will learn today is uncovering the exact emotional, physiological reasons that keep you stuck in the emotional eating cycle. And there are often reasons, or not often, there's almost always reasons for why we tend to emotionally eat or stress eat or binge eat. So we're going to dissect a couple of those layers, why those things happen from an emotional, physiological, and even another perspective. I'm going to show you that one later. So you will learn about the 3 layers of well-being, some of the layers that almost no one ever actually talks about. So make sure to stick with me on that one, and you might learn some extra on that. And obviously, I'm going to give you some super practical tips on how to practice mindful eating so that you can become a more mindful eater. And with that, also a more intuitive eater. So plus the very last thing, some practical tips about learning how to deal with negative or unwanted emotions in a different way than food. So completely packed with a lot of value. And I invite you to interact, ask questions, drop some things in the chat, whatever you feel like. It's not a must, but definitely makes this a more interesting and more, what's the right word I'm looking for? Interactive workshop. So if you joined me today or you're watching this back later in the replay, then this cycle might be familiar to you. And what we see in a lot of cases when it comes to emotional eating is that it usually starts around a strong negative emotion, usually something like that gets triggered because of a certain event, someone that is maybe mean to us, maybe your kids that have been a pain in the ass the whole day, maybe your boss that was unpleasant to you, maybe your partner that worked on your nerves, or maybe a specific kind of thought or emotion that you experience within your body. Think about maybe comparing yourself to other people that might have a different physique as you do, and that kind of triggers a certain thought, that kind of triggers a certain emotion within you. So that's usually where it starts, and where it moves towards you is then that usually leads into this overwhelming urge to basically deal with that emotion or deal with that thought through eating. So you might see yourself not really knowing why, but you see yourself, or you find yourself having that strong urge to go to the cupboard, maybe even totally not aware of it, but before you know, you open that bag of chips or that package of cookies or that bar of chocolate and you start eating. So what usually happens after that is that we eat these kind of comfort foods because it's obviously in the name of it, like they're there to comfort you, often in big amounts. So it's often in these kind of scenarios that just a handful of something, a little piece of chocolate, a few cookies doesn't really satisfy us. Instead, what happens is that we, go on almost this binge or overeating where we kind of feel that we get out of control when it comes to food, and we eat these copious amounts of food, even sometimes well beyond where we actually already feel that it isn't pleasant anymore. We are already at the level that we are uncomfortably full, but yet we keep on eating. And for people that maybe experience the other side of this can happen as well. Right? Like you might see yourself experiencing a lot of stress, a lot of negative emotions, maybe certain thoughts, and instead of eating, you might do the absolute opposite, where you lose all appetite, don't eat at all anymore, and nothing seems to satisfy you. So it can go both ways. It doesn't mean that the emotional eating cycle doesn't necessarily have to be eating. It can also be avoiding you from eating in the first place, because you might look at yourself in the mirror, you might not be happy with that, and as a result of that, you might restrict yourself actually from eating in the first place. So it can show up in different kind of ways in your life, and it's always good to be aware of how these kind of events, how these kind of situations are playing out in your life, because the more you become aware of it, the more you become aware of these different patterns, the easier it will be to actually do something about them and change them. And what then usually comes afterwards is when we ate too much or when we didn't eat at all, is that there's these strong emotions like guilt, like shame, like all these kind of thoughts that we like, why was I out of control? We usually have a lot of overwhelming emotions attached towards that. And that's basically where the cycle starts from the beginning. So because of that, we might look at ourselves being very, sometimes even really negative towards ourselves, thinking that, why did I do that? Why can I not stay in control? Why does this always happen to me, maybe even? And because of that, we then go on this restrictive diet, and we think we just need to train it off, which then at the first event or negative emotion triggers the whole cycle from the start. So with that being said and explained a little bit, I'm also curious to hear, like, what's your biggest challenge when it comes to food? And it doesn't necessarily have to be emotional eating or binge eating or whatever, that kind of mindless eating behavior. It might also just be your relationship with food in general. So that might be a lot of guilt, or it might be a lot of shame, or it might be just literally not having any idea of what to eat. And what do you feel is your biggest challenge around food? And why do you think that that is such a big influence on you? Please feel free to share that one in the chat so we can have a little bit of a discussion about that later. I might give you some good feedback that can help you overcome that. So what is your biggest challenge around food, and why is that? So to explain a little bit of the concept around mindless eating, I see I made a little typo here, but that's all right. Mindless eating is basically eating as an unconscious action or habit. So it's not something that we are aware of. It just happens, it goes on autopilot, and before we know it, we experience all these overwhelming emotions like I just explained them in the previous example. It's kind of something that we do out of pure habit. And so we're not aware of how much we're eating. We're not really aware of how it's actually making our body feel. And we're totally not aware of how the food is actually tasting, the sensations that maybe happen within our body, or the different textures, how the food is actually, the different textures of the food. So what often happens, I really like that example of you may be watching a TV show, and before you know, you'll look at the bag or you look at the plate or whatever you got, and you think like, wow, how did I finish that already? It's like we're arriving at our destination having no idea how we actually got there. And that's, I think, a classic example of what mindless eating is. So before we move on, let's quickly check the chat. One of the challenges to trust that what I eat is healthy enough, that I'm getting enough nutrients. Need to let that go. Why? Because I started intuitive eating and not quite there yet. Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. We'll definitely get back in that later. So what is causing this mindless eating can obviously be a whole wide range of all different kind of things. But what it usually comes down to are these, somewhat like 5 categories, I would say. So first of all, it's a lot of rules that we have. When we look at intuitive eating in specific, it's that the rules that we have around food, the rules that we have about dieting or our body are basically making the decisions for us, right? If you maybe think that carbohydrates are bad, or that you always have to finish a plate, or that you cannot eat or before or after a certain time, then these rules, which are so embedded into your system, are basically deciding for you what needs to happen. So these diet and mindset rules are a very big limiting factor for you to actually tune in with your body, because instead of listening to what your body needs and maybe being hungry at 9 o'clock in the evening and feeling that you didn't eat enough, there's this rule that it's telling you, no, has been 8 o'clock, cannot eat anymore, and you avoid from actually giving your body what it needs. And these rules and this mindset can show up in many different kind of ways. So the question obviously gets like, how is this for you? What are those rules that you have around your body, around dieting, and how is this actually affecting you? So another big thing, I gave the example already around sitting in front of the TV, maybe watching some YouTube or being busy on your phone, maybe having kids running around, is distraction. Distraction, multitasking is a big one that's preventing us to actually give our attention and our full attention to actually what we're eating in that moment. Biggest issue is emotional eating and then punishing the next day with eating less. That's a typical restrict cycle that we often see. So I'll get back to a few of them later on as well. Thank you for sharing. So, and besides the diet rules, the mindset, the distraction, another one, obviously, when we think about emotional eating, is stress and emotions, and especially our inability to deal with it properly. Instead of sitting with it, and I already go ahead a little bit of what we are going to talk about later on, instead of just letting those emotions be and making peace with them, we try to fight them, we try to resist them, we try to suppress them or walk away from them or judge them as bad. And this is usually what's causing the whole cycle of emotional eating. And on top of that, we're not listening to our body. So our body knows, and we have an innate source, a born source that is always telling us exactly what it needs. And all these calorie counting and all these apps and all these different kind of external tools, we really don't need them, because your body has already all the answer. Your body knows what it needs and when it needs it. However, we forgot how to listen to it. So not listening to your body is what's causing a lot of this mindless eating, because we eat past our hunger and fullness signals, or we just ignore them completely in the first place by maybe thinking like, oh, I'm too busy, or I ate too much yesterday, better skip this meal. So not listening to our body will always bite us in the ass later on, and is a big contributor to mindless eating or at that emotional or binge eating cycle. And then another one that you might not think of is actually lower or bad quality of sleep, because sleep is such an important factor when it comes to regulating your hormones, regulating your mood, making you feel relaxed, resetting that internal clock, that if you don't sleep well, especially consistently, you're so much more likely to make lesser choices for yourself. And you need your full mental focus, your full cognitive function to actually make proper decisions. And when emotions are high, when stress levels are higher, which is usually a direct cause of lower quality of sleep, we are much more likely to end up eating mindlessly or emotionally. So maybe a good question to ask for yourself also, you can drop it in the chat, not necessarily, but what do you think plays a big role in your life? Might it be the diet rules? Might it be the distraction? Maybe the emotions or the stress? Try to pinpoint what is something that's playing a big role in your life, because if you can pinpoint it a bit more precisely, it's also going to make it easier to give that some more focus to start working on that primarily. And you will already start to see that a big relief around emotional eating will happen. So how this can affect you, a whole list of different ways. I just want to go quickly through them. Obviously, the overeating, undereating, emotional or stressful eating. We talked about that, obviously, how this can affect you as well. Also, there's a whole wide range of literally like physical symptoms, like bloating, like feeling gas, like having stomach acid, even having gut or digestive issues. If you tend to overeat all the time, this could have a whole wide range of physical symptoms. It could even lower the absorption of certain nutrients because your stomach is too full, food cannot be properly digested, which even can cause long-term digestive issues. I think about irregular bowel movements, think about gut issues such as IBS, and there's so many things how we eat can affect our gut health. And you probably know that your gut health is one of the biggest contributors to a healthy immune system and your overall health. So we really want that to be at the core of our health and well-being. But also, besides that, things that you might not be aware of is that actually overeating, but also undereating can cause, especially overeating in this case, can cause really high levels of blood sugar, which is basically one of the key indicators towards insulin resistance, which can cause diabetes. So making sure that you eat more mindful and not overeat can actually prevent diseases in later stages of your life. Also, this is one of the big reasons why we tend to overeat in the first place, because of leptin resistance, which is basically our hunger level. So if we have a very distorted relationship with food and tend to eat very mindlessly, what can happen is that we create leptin resistance, which is causing us to basically have distorted hunger and fullness signals. So it becomes increasingly difficult for your body to give you the right information. And that's why a lot of us tend to not know when we're hungry and tend to not know when we're actually full. And besides all of these physical side effects of mindless eating or emotional eating, there's obviously the whole mental spectrum to it as well. And the stress, the anxiety, the guilt, the shame around food and your body, which is maybe even more damaging. And like this, how would you say it, like this kind of snowball effect that then can have an even more devastating effect on your physical health as well. So I don't talk about this to worry you. I don't talk about this to cause any stress, but I do really believe that it is important what can happen on the short term and the long term if we continue to go down the same direction as we are going right now. But there's obviously positive things as well, right? The benefits of mindful eating, I should say, is that it will help with improved digestion. It will help with better nutrient absorption, and it will greatly increase the satisfaction that you have with food. It will improve your relationship with food. It will improve the relationship you have with your body. It prevents you from overeating, and it will make you so much more in tune with your body and its hunger and fullness signal. So there's so much benefits to eating more mindful that I think that this is one of the key habits when it comes to nutrition, and actually a really big pillar in your overall health and well-being as well. But I'm going to tell you a little bit more how we can actually do that and how you can achieve that for yourself. So with knowing this already, with having this information, I'm really curious what you think is your biggest obstacle around mindful eating. What did you recognize from the previous points? What are some of the things that you thought like played a big role for you to have a difficulty to eat mindful? Is it the distraction? Is it the rules? Is it the emotions and the stress? Let me know in the chat if you want to, or get back to me about it later, of course, as well. Distraction, yeah, always a big one. So a really important one is that the what can't go without the how. I think with nutrition and health in general is that we have a lot of emphasis on what we're doing, the right kind of movements, the right kind of exercises, the right kind of nutrition, whatever that may mean, instead of actually how we're doing it in the first place. It seems to be more important that you can lift 100 kilos in the gym, or do 50 squats, or run 5 kilometers, or that your plate looks a certain way, but then we don't pay attention to how we're actually doing that. And from personal experience, working with many people, I see that actually the how is much more important, because you can do the what good, but if the how isn't good or it's mindless, then you're not going to get the benefits of it, and you might actually even cause more damage to begin with. So that's why in the intuitive eating journey and within the coaching that I do, we always start with the how and the reasons behind we're doing something always first, and then comes the what. Difficult because of emotions and keeping the motivation. Thanks for sharing. So what is mindful eating? We talked about mindless eating, what that is. If I would describe mindful eating, I would say something like this: being aware of how and what you eat, and the sensations, feelings, and thoughts that come along with it, without saying that that is something good, something bad. So basically, without judgment. And this is something that you can experience for yourself as well. So you might be a little bit more on the left spectrum, more a little bit maybe in the diet spectrum. And considering food, if you look at it thinking like, can I eat this? Can I not eat this? While when we start to practice mindful eating and start to eat more intuitively, it's no longer about can I or can I not. It's more about, do I want to? Is this going to satisfy me? Do I actually want this? Is this going to not leave me hungry afterwards? Am I actually hungry to begin with? And does it sound good to me? So the questions really change, and your outlook on food, your perspective of food is massively going to change when your mindset around it changes as well. And this is really what you can expect when you start to embark on your intuitive eating journey. This is where you will very likely, if you incorporate the right steps, progress towards to. So let's dive into the 3 layers, the 3 main reasons that tend to lead to emotional or binge eating. Could be, in your case, under eating as well. I would categorize them in either one of these 3 categories. So first of all, there's the biological or physical hunger. And what I mean with that is that obviously your body needs fuel, right? It needs energy. And one of the main contributors to emotional eating and binge eating is that we are not fueling ourselves. We're not giving ourselves enough calories. And I'm actually going to do a little exercise with you in 1 second after I explain this. But what tends to happen is when we undereat, It's basically just a defense mechanism of our body to then want to overeat to compensate. It's basically just wanting to take care of you. That's how nice your body actually is. Like your body is just, oh, let me just fix this. Let me just take care of you. Oh, you didn't eat so much today, so let me make sure that we get in enough so that if this happens again, I at least had my energy. I at least had my calories. And the exercise around that I want to do to basically show you that example and how that plays out is, oh, we're going too fast. Is basically to stop breathing for a little bit. So I want you to close your nose, close your mouth, and hold your breath for as long as you can. You probably cannot hold it much longer than maybe 30 to 60 seconds anyway. So let's try this out. Try and hold your breath for as long as you can. And when you feel that urge to gasp for air, obviously you can do that. You don't need to hold it longer than you can. Oh, still holding their breath, really good. So if you're still holding it, that's really nice. So what you notice is when you stop holding your breath, it's what does the body do? Like its first response is to just gasp for air, right? It's just the body's survival mechanism. Oh, you gave me not enough air or no air at all. So now I want to compensate and pull as much in as I can right in that moment. And this is basically the same principle that happens when we talk about emotional or binge eating. When you deprive yourself of nutrients, when you deprive your body of energy, it wants to overcompensate by getting in as much as it can as quickly as possible. So binge eating is not something to feel bad about. It's not something to think like, oh, that only happens to me. It's actually just a signal, a warning signal that you are not giving your body what it actually needs. Little dizzy, don't do it too long. So the next part is obviously the mindset, the beliefs that we have around food. This is what more on the surface, the diet rules I explained a little bit earlier. And in my course, the 6-week Reconnect course, this is something that we will dive much more in depth into, but because of the time, we will focus today more on biological or physical hunger, as well as how to deal with stress and emotions. Brings me to the third point, obviously our stress and emotions as well. So it wouldn't be called emotional eating if emotions weren't a big part in that. And what happens is that our stress and emotions are responsible for such a big part in what actions we take. So when you're not stressed, when you're feeling happy, when you're feeling calm, when you're feeling joyful, it's so much easier to make decisions for yourself that are in line with the person that you want to be, or it's so much easier to not snap and be calm and be kind to someone when you are feeling calm and relaxed. But are you going to react the same exact way when you had an annoying phone call, or there was maybe someone on the job that wasn't nice to you, or maybe your kids were a pain in the butt all damn day? It's so much harder, right, to act in that exact calm, joyful way as you maybe would normally do. And this is obviously the same when it comes to food as well. So when you are relaxed, when you are joyful, when you're calm, it's so much easier to make these decisions for yourself that are more based on willpower or your mental capacity. But this isn't always the case. And that's why it's so incredibly important to learn how to deal with stress and emotions in a more positive way that isn't necessarily food. And that's what I'm going to show you also. So first of all, to give you a little bit more insight about like biological hunger, give you a few tips on that, is that the first step, which is really important, is to learn how to recognize the different types of hunger. And because of the time, I'm not going to go in depth in this right now, but if you want to know more about that, the Reconnect course really dives deep into all the different kind of hungers that you can experience and how you can actually satisfy them. A craving for a specific type of food will not be satisfied in the same way as a biological hunger where you just need energy. So learning how to recognize these different types of hunger and learning how to eat for satisfaction. What is going to help me to satisfy that specific type of hunger without just only eating for nutrition, but as well for flavor, taste, and enjoyment. Because I think that that's really where the magic happens, right? If you go to a restaurant, the chef knows how to cook to give you a full sensory experience. It's not that the chef only uses sour. No, he uses all the different kind of tastes that you can experience. He uses strong smells and strong aromas and maybe an amazing presentation that sparks different kind of senses. So eating for satisfaction isn't only about what you eat, it's also how that is combined with different kind of elements and in what kind of setting you're maybe eating it. So learning how to recognize different types of hunger and how you can specifically satisfy that specific hunger is a really important part in actually fulfilling that biological hunger. And the one tip that we're going to talk about today that's really going to help you to become more of a mindful eater is to learn how to listen to your hunger and fullness cues, because that's really where it starts. So you see this hunger and fullness scale. That looks so weird, fullness scale with 3 S's. Maybe I typed that wrong, but who knows? It doesn't matter. Maybe it should have been like a little bit in between. But you see this scale, and the scale basically has from 1 to 10 the levels of hunger that we can experience. So 1 would be painfully hungry or hangry, in absolute rage, feeling like you didn't eat for 2 days straight. And that's basically the range that we always want to avoid. And you see the angry face. Usually we're not the most pleasant and happy person when we get in that kind of zone, right? I don't know who experiences this, but I definitely have been there in the past. So this is kind of the range that we always want to try and avoid, because at this point, it's so hard to control our emotions. It's so hard to control that defense mechanism or survival mechanism of the body to not start to overeat. That's why it's really important to eat in this kind of sweet zone and the sweet spot, which is from pretty hungry to slightly hungry. That's basically the range where we want to start eating. So what can be really helpful for you is to take a screenshot of that hunger and fullness scale and check in with yourself a couple times throughout the day. And before you want to start eating, like, hey, where am I actually right now? Am I really hungry? Am I pretty hungry? Slightly hungry? What is that range of hunger that I'm experiencing right now? So that you can start to make more well-informed decisions based on that. So you usually want to start eating around slight hunger to pretty hungry. And we want to stop eating around pretty satisfied to lightly satisfied. That's basically the sweet spot for stopping to eat, because that is not causing any discomfort within our body. That's not causing us to overeat. Obviously, there will be times where you feel comfortable to eat a little bit more, because they don't call it comfort eating to begin with. It is a very effective method into soothing emotions. So sometimes that might be pleasant when you go to an awesome restaurant and the food is just so good, or it's Christmas and you just want to eat a little bit more because it's just so damn tasty. There's nothing wrong with that, right? Unless we do it at least in a mindful way. I think that that's really the important part that we have to keep in mind with this. Like, it isn't a bad thing to be a bit more hangry from time to time, to be a bit more overfull from time to time. But is it a mindful decision? Are we aware of us doing that? Or is it a coping mechanism? Or is it a unconscious habit that seems to be a pattern that's coming back over and over again? So print out the hunger fullness scale, take a screenshot for yourself, and check in multiple times a day. This is really going to help you to be more in touch with your hunger and fullness levels. And probably, one of the easiest ways to actually get started with mindful eating to begin with. So emotions and stress, I think the second, maybe even for you, the biggest one that plays a big role in emotional eating. And this little chart here can really help you to not get to a point where your emotions get the best of you. Because as soon as we get overwhelmed with these emotions, when these emotions absorb us, it's so difficult to step out of that and then make decisions to say like, no, I'm not opening the box of cookies or the bag of chips, or to stop what I'm doing right now. That's so incredibly difficult. That's why it's really important to learn how to recognize the patterns, learn how to recognize the triggers and the tendencies. So basically you can stop yourself before it happens. And the more you learn how to recognize all these little nuances, how to learn to recognize what is triggering you, learn to recognize what is the behavior that you want to do. I know if I experience these emotions, I want to open the fridge. I know if I experience these emotions, I'm going to run to the supermarket and I'm going to get myself chocolate. The more you notice that, the easier it becomes to stop yourself from doing it. And what can really help is to zoom in what is actually happening within your body. So what emotions can you identify? Is it anger? Is it frustration? Is it self-hate? Is it whatever the emotion is that you experience right now? Try to identify it. Try to label that as in like, oh, every time I want to overeat or not eat at all, I feel this specific emotion coming up. I feel this specific sensation happening in my body. My heart rate goes up. I'm getting sweaty palms. I feel this pressure on my chest. And what is that sensation that you can experience? Because like I said, that's the warning sign. That's basically telling you, ooh, I'm getting in this state of arousal. I'm getting in this state of stress where my body wants to react in a way that I don't want. And usually what is a big indicator as well is the thoughts that we experience around it. So you might see yourself scrolling through social media, checking other people that are maybe fitness influencers, having a certain body. You may be checking models or whatever, and you might feel less about yourself. So what is the thought pattern that goes through your head when you experience something like that? Because that's like a red flag, right? That's a warning sign that's telling you, ooh, if I don't pay attention to this, this is what could come next. And then the next part, which is really important, is to learn how to make peace with it. You're not alone in this, but I know I did this for many, many years. What usually happens is that we try to fight this, so that we say, oh, I shouldn't be feeling like that. Why can I not? Why does this always happen to me? And that we judge it. Learning how to make peace with it really allows us to let that feeling or that emotion or sensation be, instead of it absorbing us. And how you can do that is by inviting it on the chair next to you. Hey, say, have a seat with me. What is happening here? Asking yourself, what do I need right now? Saying to yourself, it's okay to experience this emotion. You're human. We are meant to experience a wide range of emotions, from the maybe negative ones to the super positive, ecstatic ones. So making peace with it really allows us to let go of that emotion. And then the last step, which is really important, is change it. Because what will happen is that this pattern, especially if this is something that you've been dealing with for many years, will come back and back and back and back over and over and over again. So what you will see is maybe you don't go to the cupboard or you don't go to the fridge, and 10, 15, 20 minutes later, the same sensation, the same thought might come back up because it's hardwired in your brain. So to learn how to do something in that moment so that you can change it, that's really where the magic happens. And here are some things that you can do. I would find out things that really work for you and manage your emotions in a positive way by calling a friend, taking a nap, journaling it out so you create distance between you and the emotion. But already identifying and thinking about those first 3 steps is making the unconscious habit conscious. You're basically having a big flashlight and you're shining on that part which you previously weren't aware of. And that's already creating change. So the more you can shine that flashlight on those darker parts of your subconsciousness, it already creates change. And then to put it into action and really practice a habit that isn't food, isn't suppressing it, will really allow for big change long-term as well. Checking my time. Already well on the way, so I'm going a little bit faster through this part, but how to eat more mindful. There's a lot of ways to do this, but I want to pick out a few that can really help you do that. But first of all, I explained it to give attention to the type of hunger that you actually experience and how can you satisfy that. You maybe have a craving for chocolate. That's all right. It's not bad to have a craving for chocolate. I love chocolate. I love ice cream. And if I experience that, sometimes I want to satisfy that craving with just eating what I crave. You can help to do that, help yourself doing that by asking yourself these questions like, what sounds good? What do I want? And what does my body need? Might not be the same answer in all the different 3 questions, but it can really help you to give attention to that type of hunger and learn how to satisfy it. Another big one, obviously, I mentioned it already, distraction. So remove the distraction. If you know you're going to eat, put your phone down, turn off the TV, let your kids play outside, and set the table for yourself and really practice to be present with your meal. And that's obviously what mindful eating means to begin with. Just all of your attention, all of your focus with your meal, with your senses, with the texture and the food and the experience of eating itself. So what helps is to take a deep breath before you start, which allows you to slow down, which allows you to have a more pleasant experience all throughout, and practice some gratitude. Hey, thank yourself for making this meal for you. Thank you that I'm able to do this. Be grateful that you have food on a plate. There's so many people that don't have that. Be grateful for the people that produce the food or the people in the grocery stores that stock the shelves with the food. And there's so much to be grateful for when we zoom in. And when we are grateful for something, we want to enjoy it, right? And to use the example of the restaurant again, when you go to a restaurant, you don't just think, fuck this shit. No, you're thankful, right? You go to a restaurant, it's something exciting. It's an experience. You're thankful that this amazing chef has prepared this wonderful food for you. You're thankful that you don't have to do your own dishes. So be grateful for it. Immediately increases the satisfaction that you will have in the food and will likely cause you to slow down significantly because you want to enjoy something that you're grateful for, right? Chewing slowly, another great way to be eating more mindful and really giving attention to your senses when you slow down with chewing. And so what am I actually tasting? Sour, sweet, bitter, umami. What am I smelling? Oh, I'm smelling this herb, I'm smelling that spice, I'm smelling caramelization. And what kind of textures are you experiencing? So really give your attention to your senses, which will not only increase satisfaction, but will make you a more mindful eater to begin with as well. And focus on what's happening within your body. What sensations do I experience? Oh, I feel slowly my stomach starting to expand. Maybe you have certain thoughts. Maybe you're eating something that you previously deemed to be a bad food, or you're eating outside a time that you would normally eat. Maybe that thought comes up of like, oh, I shouldn't be eating this, or oh, I better go for that run tomorrow. And what kind of emotions are attached to that? Zoom in to your hunger and fullness signals. Check in a couple of times throughout your dinner. Where am I? Where am I on the scale of hunger and fullness? Am I still on the hungry level? Okay, I will keep eating. And as soon as you start to experience, oh, I'm getting to that level of lightly satisfied. Do I still want to eat? Is this not going to be too much? Check in with yourself. When you just start eating, maybe halfway through, a little bit more towards the end, which really helps you to become more connected with your hunger and fullness signals. And this is probably one of the easiest ones to practice, and also really going to be one of the more impactful ones. And the last thing is journal it. I like write those things down. I don't need to explain any more about that. Write down these things. Oh, today I ate very slowly. I was present. I was grateful. It made me feel like this. Today I stopped eating, or today I overate. It didn't feel good. Start to recognize those patterns for yourself. You can pause them here if you're watching it back. A few tips, basically just what we explained here as well. So how to get started with mindful eating, because 9 tips, I know that's not practical. That's too much. That's overwhelming. So choose one meal or a snack where you want to start practicing your mindful eating habit, and choose a mindful step to start practicing with, and make it a ritual. So set the table, take a deep breath, maybe practice some gratitude. Maybe that's your ritual. I would recommend to focus on one of the numbers 6, 7, or 8. So really focus on your senses, really focus on your body, or really focus on your hunger and fullness signals. Really pick one of them that you think is going to have the biggest impact in your mindful eating habits. Practice it for a week, one meal, one snack every single day. Keep a little journal and notice the difference. And if you didn't notice a lot, practice it another week, or maybe try out a different one. If you do notice difference, okay, what was the difference? What caused the difference? And from there on, you will start to make small changes towards your eating habits, which is going to give you all those benefits that we talked about all the way in the beginning. So rounding up slowly, the last part of this workshop, the 3 layers of well-being that not a lot of people talk about. And the outer layer, that's something that we hear a lot about. It's what we eat, it's the exercise, the sleep, the thoughts that we have, the rules that you maybe have around food. It's very much like brain centered. Like, yeah, it's not really from the heart. It's really more from up here. So if you see someone who makes a lot of decisions, like from your brain area, and makes a lot of decisions, is very like rational, then you're probably operating a lot out of that outer layer. However, what we saw today is that especially the second and third layer, the emotional and the subconscious layer, actually responsible for much more of your behavior than that outer layer. So the emotional layer, the emotions and stress, really comes more from the heart. It's really more operated out of the body. When thoughts are the language of the brain, emotions are the language of the body. And I just showed you a couple of examples of how to connect more with your emotions and how to deal with them in a less stressful way and in a more positive way. But the layer that's in the end of the day really the key to making long-term changes is a subconscious layer. And this is something that hardly anyone talks about when we look in the health and fitness world, because everyone is so focused on especially that first outer layer. But the thing is that if you don't make changes within the subconscious layer, you might make some changes in the beginning. You might sleep well for a couple of weeks. You might eat well for a couple of weeks. You might train for a couple of weeks. And think about the beginning of the year. But what then happens? That voice inside of our head pops up again, telling us that we cannot do it, telling us that we're not getting results yet, telling us that it didn't matter or that we're not worth it. So all these beliefs and patterns that we have really come from our subconscious mind. And if we don't learn how to address them, it's very likely that eventually we'll fall back into our old behavior. So to quickly show you how you can do that is to, first of all, identify those limiting beliefs, identify those patterns, and check for yourself, like, how are they actually affecting you? How are they showing up in my life? Those triggers, tendencies, sensations that you experience in your body, and then asking yourself if they are actually true to begin with. And then the last step, and that's usually the hardest one, is to actually change them. But I didn't want to make this workshop all about that. I think also for now, that with the mindful eating habits, you have a really nice approach to start implementing some practical tips and some practical solutions to become a more mindful and intuitive eater. But if you really want to dive deeper into this, I have an amazing course for you, 6 weeks to reconnect with your body, where the subconscious layer will be dissected much deeper and changed, obviously, as well. So with that being said, we're rounding up until the end of the workshop. And mindful eating replaces self-criticism with self-nurturing. So instead of judging yourself, blaming yourself for what you do, you start to now actually care for yourself. It's basically one of the biggest self-care and self-love things you can do is nurturing your body in a way that feels good, right? So it replaces a lot of that shame that we have with respect for your own inner wisdom. That brings me to the little surprise that I have for you. So if after all of this, you feel like you want to dive deeper into this, want to have some more support, some personal approach, someone that holds you accountable with this, I have an amazing program, told you already a little bit about this, which helped some amazing people, already got amazing results, really changed their outlook on food, their outlook on their body, and let go of that stress and shame and emotional eating, and instead become intuitive eaters. And that's basically what this course is all about. So if you want to really feel in charge, full of energy, learn how to make peace with food and truly enjoy it, and feel confident and happy in your own body and skin, maybe even be a better role model for your kids, and definitely never do another diet again, then I think this is an amazing investment in your long-term health. And as you see right there, so many different things included, from workout plans to recipes, lifetime access to an amazing course and weekly group coaching calls, and even a community of like-minded people. Plus, right now, because you watch this workshop today, only this weekend, you even get an extra €50 from me back. So if that's something that you're interested in, I'm going to pop a link to my schedule to schedule a call or ask me some additional questions. And with that being said, let's move to the Q&A. I want to thank you so much for joining me here today. If you're watching this back on the replay, always feel free to reach out to me to answer any of your questions, or if you just want to have that extra support, have that extra level of accountability, then always feel free to book a call with me and see how I can help you on your journey to become an intuitive eater as well. Thank you so much and have a great day.